Ladies and gentlemen, the incidence of people living in extreme poverty in the region has fallen from more than 50% in the mid-70s to less than 18%. Larry and also Satish gave us interesting development figures there. For some, it appears that the extension of current trends will create a dramatically transformed Asia by 2020 and beyond automatically. I don't think that will happen automatically, that these trends in poverty reduction will just be projectable as trends. In 2020, Asia will still hold, according to current predictions, 50% of the world's extreme poor, and best projections indicate that still 3 quarters of these poor will live in rural areas. So policy action is called for to turn that around. You will hear very interesting original and new research, for instance in the paper by Akhtar Ahmed and colleagues, on what's happening below that line. We should not just fix on the line above and below, but what's happening far below the line is, I think, also very important. I would like to add a couple of remarks to Peter Timmer's conceptual framework issues, and which I very much appreciate. I think that will be helpful throughout the conference. I would like to add one dimension by pointing to the rapid demographic change in the context of structural change. The aging rural population and the growing share of women farmers, for instance in China, a very large share, many regions, I understand from my colleagues working on China, have more than 70% farms headed by women now in China, for instance. So that demographic shift and change in terms of age and gender composition is a very important aspect of rural transformation, and calls for attention to policy actions in the field, for instance, of insurance systems, insurance markets, and so on. Secondly, on the pathways approach, which is very close to our hearts, Agnes Kisumbing here from IFPRI is co-leading the Pathways from Poverty research program at IFPRI for the last 5 years. What I think turns out there, very much in support of what Peter said, is we are confronted with a lot of dynamics of into poverty, out of poverty. It's not a stable group. And I add one point here. These pathways out of poverty for the poor have to be built on shaking grounds, because the fundamentals of what creates poverty are rapidly changing. Ross mentioned some of these issues in terms of price changes and the income change patterns. My last point on conceptual issues, which I hope we can come back to, relates to the diversity of shortfalls in well-being beyond income poverty. The dimensions, for instance, which need to be factored in here relate to health and nutrition, especially early childhood nutrition, which so far do not correlate well to the reduction in income poverty. So the much slower decline in undernutrition of children, for instance, in South Asia, than the rates of growth in rural areas, economic growth, or in the economy as a whole, is a challenge. We need to address these broader well-being shortfalls, which are so much undermining the economic potentials of rural population, especially children.